In this section, we're going to take a look at the deployment methodologies and management platforms available for the endpoint privilege management solution. Naturally, as customers go beyond considering the use cases for the EPM technology, they start to imagine how this technology might be deployed into their own environment. And they might start to consider some of the challenges and limitations that may be enforced on them by the nature of where their users are located or the infrastructure they're operating within. So it's important we have a range of different options we can draw upon in order to satisfy the different requirements. Let's take a look first at all the different deployment methodologies. We'll go into them in more detail and also do a comparison between all the different capabilities a little bit later on. Let's begin by introducing them to you. So as you can already see from the slide, there's a number of different formal management platforms available for us to choose from. Starting on the left-hand side, we have Active Directory or Microsoft Active Directory Group Policy to be specific. The name rather gives away exactly what we're doing here, but essentially what we're leveraging is the existing group policy infrastructure that organizations will often have in place, and using that to deliver policy out to our managed endpoints. In that environment, we're using group policy to push policy out. And in order to collect audit data and provide reporting infrastructure, we actually will deploy additional components alongside the Active Directory system, including Windows Event Collectors and a SQL Server backend. This is a highly scalable, very robust, very resilient infrastructure, and it's one we've used successfully for a number of years. But it's certainly one that's becoming increasingly out of favor as organizations move towards the cloud more aggressively. There are some obvious limitations with this particular platform in that it is bound to Active Directory, so devices need to be domain joined in order to be able to manage them. And also, it doesn't really cater for our macOS devices as well, which also is something we're talking about today. As we look across to the next item on the list, we see McAfee's ePolicy Orchestrator, or EPO. This is another platform where we can deliver policy out to our end user systems. We can also actually deploy the agents using that technology, and we can collect audit data back all inside that one ecosystem. And the actual management infrastructure there is very tightly integrated into the EPO system, something that will make it a very familiar experience for anybody who's an established EPO administrator. And also we're able to leverage some of the additional capabilities that McAfee offer in their tie-in DXL platforms to allow us to share and consume audit data into that system and can compare it with, for example, risk intelligence data that they may be able to provide to their customers. Looking across the slides there, we see Beyond Trust PM SaaS as the next item on the list. This is one of our own internally developed platforms. In this case, this is one specifically designed for customers who are looking for a subscription model service. They don't want to manage the system themselves. They want to just consume the system and be able to support their end users. And once again, we can deliver policy management and audit data collection and reporting using this type of platform. One of the more unique aspects to this particular methodology is that it's able to manage systems when they're domain joined, non-domain joined, and when they're on or off the corporate network. Essentially, all the device needs is an internet connection, and we can reach out and touch that device, bringing policy to it, whilst collecting that audit data to show us what the users have been doing to help us, again, inform policy design, and also keep an eye on what the users are up to. Looking at the final item on the list, we have Beyond Trust, Beyond Insight. This again is one of our internally developed platforms and is available as a cloud deployable option, but it's very much the center pin of our unified privilege management approach, where we can actually bring together a number of our technologies to deliver a broader PAM capability inside an organization. That might include things like session management and credential rotation, again, as well as things like the EPM management side of things. Certainly one of the common themes that we see running through these is this policy delivery mechanism and the audit data collection. Again, that is pretty universally true. Every one of these platforms can do it. Again, the Beyond Insight platform can also operate much the same way as the PM SaaS option, reaching out to deliver policy to systems that are connected to the internet, providing that it's been deployed in that internet-facing configuration. Again, one of the other common themes we see across the platforms is this unified reporting, the ability for us to collate audit data and present that in a usable way to our administrative users. We have a series of dashboards that allow us to interrogate that information, to drill down, to get to the very fine-grained details, but also to be able to take a step back and look at the very high level, to look for patterns and trends emerging, that again might help inform our policy design choices. Again, these technologies on these management platforms are very much focused on the Windows and Mac side of things, with the exception of the Beyond Insight platform, which also allows us to support our Unix Linux system, which, as we mentioned earlier on in the introductions, isn't the focus of our session today. We are very much focused on Windows and Mac, but I thought I'd mention that just for completeness. Okay, let's take a look at some other higher level considerations for the different management platforms before we go a little bit deeper and looking at the actual architectures themselves. One of the really powerful features of the product is actually we're delivering the same configuration file regardless of the management platform. What that essentially means is that we're able to move that configuration around between management platforms as customer requirements evolve and change. Customers aren't locked into a particular management platform over time. So for example, if they start their journey with us using group policy, but decide actually further down the line they'd like to move to our PM SaaS platform, for example, they can take the configuration they've built and have honed and refined over the years and deploy it through a different management platform. The client-side behavior doesn't change, the client itself doesn't change, it's simply a change in the back-end management infrastructure and something we can actually orchestrate very, very seamlessly. So very, very powerful, very kind of flexible, and something that's a great reassurance to customers when they're thinking about which approach to take. Also being able to blend together different management platforms where we need to as well, another important and powerful capability. Which leads me into my next point, in that the client can actually receive policy from multiple sources at the same time. Again, this could allow us to support environments where we have more restricted internet connectivity, for example, and we need to support users on an internal network, and also be able to reach out and touch them when they're off the network as well. We can certainly deliver that same policy we described for multiple sources within the environment, and the client can make sense of that. It can order and take a precedent setting to define which policy is going to take priority over one another. But ultimately, we can always deliver configuration out to those user endpoints, regardless of where they are. And that includes be able to use less formal management approaches to also reach those devices. So we've seen on the previous slide those 4 formal management platforms, but that isn't the only way we can actually deliver policy. We can deliver policy via a native web server capability within the client. The client can connect to a web service, pull down configuration, and use that configuration on the local system. The big gap there is something we alluded to previously, is the ability for us to collect and collate audit data. The customer would have to then implement an alternative collection mechanism, perhaps using something we've referred to earlier, like the Windows Event Collector infrastructure, or maybe using a SIEM tool, using a client-side event collector to collate that information and make use of it. We can also support local policy objects. And again, this could be something we might use in more restrictive environments, like an air-gapped system, for example. We could use something like an SCCM or an Altiris or Intune type technology to deliver policy directly outside of kind of the formal management systems onto a system, or even deliver it via something like a USB key, whatever is the most appropriate deployment model for a particular system. But ultimately, that system can operate offline without needing to actually communicate with a formal management platform. And again, this is a key part of the technology that allows it to operate even when the user's connectivity is lost. So when the users are working offline and working remotely, even the kind of the more traditional management platforms like Active Directory can still support those users, providing they do periodically connect back into the network via a VPN, for example, or where something else is able to establish that network connectivity for them. So let's take a look at some of the management platforms in a little bit more detail and see exactly how they work. First, we'll take a look at the Active Directory group policy model. As we can see at the top of the slide there, we have our Active Directory group policy infrastructure. Of course, this could be massively scaled out across entire global estates, or it could be a single domain controller inside a small environment. It doesn't really make any difference to the way that the technology is deployed. We're simply going to leverage what is already there. The way we do that is to use an MMC snap-in, which we use for policy administration. That connects into an existing group policy object, whether that be a local group policy object or a domain group policy object, as is probably the most appropriate in this particular case. That allows us to embed our XML file into a group policy object and have that delivered to our client-side agents. We use a group policy client-side extension there to extract the XML file and load it into our agent, and that's what delivers the functionality to our end users. And as part of that, we're going to be generating audit data as the users go through their day-to-day activity. And that information is going to be passed back into our reporting system through the event collection infrastructure we described previously. This is a Windows Event Collector infrastructure, something again is very highly scalable in the hundreds of thousands of systems deployed in our example customers. And this is something that again allows us to collate information from the end user system and push that data back into a SQL Server database for longer term retention and trend analysis. And we use a series of SQL Server reporting services dashboards to actually go and interrogate that data and look for those patterns and trends. You'll also see that there's a connection between the management console and that reporting database, and that's something you'll see throughout the other technologies as well. The ability for us to connect into that audit data and actually retrieve the snippets of information, much like we did in the demonstration earlier on, to pull data in and actually utilize that when we're building and refining our policies. And again, that then goes through the same cycle of pushing the policy back out, using that group policy infrastructure, delivering it to our end users, and then generating audit data to feed back in. And that's so that loop continues. So relatively straightforward, relatively simple infrastructure in this case of Active Directory. Moving into our group policy, moving into our ePolicy orchestrator environment. Again, we see at the center of it our EPO environment, and EPO has a number of different deployment models that allow us to accommodate for devices that are on network or off network. So we can deliver what they call an internet-facing agent gateway that allows us to deploy an EPO instance into a DMZ, for example, as this is traditionally deployed on an on-premise estate. You can deploy those components into a DMZ, and that gives us the ability to reach out and deliver policy, retrieve audit data from those agents that are in the field. Now, all the administration is performed using the web-based management interface that is the EPO ecosystem. As we mentioned previously, our tooling integrates into that system and aligns itself with the way you would manage any other part of the EPO system. So very familiar to an EPO user. In terms of how the client side operates, it uses an EPM agent, and then that talks to the local EPO agent that's actually talking back to the main management platform and retrieving the policy objects and handing it off to our client. Our client is working in reverse when it's dealing with the audit data it generates. It hands it back off to the EPO agent, and the EPO agent then forwards that information back into the EPO infrastructure. Now you can see at the back end, once the information is pushed back, it's going into the same auditing and reporting database, the same kind of SQL database we saw previously when we talked about Active Directory. And again, that's giving us the long-term trend analysis. There is an additional element of audit data handling with EPO. We do have the ability to push data into the EPO threat tables, which allows us to provide some dashboard information, again, as part of that EPO interface, to maybe select a subset of information to provide a high-level overview or some very actionable intelligence that users might be able to see at a glance, as well as having the more comprehensive enterprise reporting infrastructure also embedded into that interface. So again, that's the EPO infrastructure. Again, very much piggybacking on an infrastructure that's already in place. Again, another very highly scalable infrastructure, but one that we are not having to deploy a lot of additional infrastructure to actually be able to support. Moving into the Beyond Insight platform. Again, this is an appliance-based model. So this is something where we're going to deploy typically a virtualized appliance into a customer environment. And again, we can build this out with what we call an event server. Again, this mimics the model that we just saw previously with EPO, where we have an internet-facing component. In this case, we refer to it as an event server, but it gives us that ability to reach out with policy and to pull back audit data, even when we are deploying it on-prem. But as I also mentioned, this can be deployed into a cloud environment. We do have the Beyond Insight system available in various different cloud marketplaces as well. So again, lots of flexible options in terms of how we actually deploy this. Again, in terms of administration, we use a blend of a web-based policy management interface, web-based management interface for Beyond Insight itself, and we also use the MMC for policy management as well. So again, we will make policy management changes, upload them into the BI system. The BI system is then responsible for communicating out to our endpoints to actually deliver that policy and obviously then handle the retrieval of audit data back. So again, we have the EPM agent at the client side, and we also have what we call the Beyond Insight adapter. That adapter is actually part of the client package, but it allows us to create a secure HTTPS connection between the client system and our BI appliance to communicate that information back and forth securely. And again, that could be direct with a single BI appliance, or it could be with a Beyond Insight event server, as we previously described. Again, as you can see, we also have that ability for us to archive data into that same auditing and reporting database to allow us to archive that information for long-term retention and for trend analysis. And again, as we can see, we can use the MMC snapping to reach into that data set, bring the information back into our policy management activities. And again, that's how the information flows through that cycle. And finally, we have our PM SaaS model. Again, we can see PM SaaS at the center of it, where we see our policy distribution and element collection infrastructure being deployed. Again, this is obviously not something that customers get directly involved in. They're going to be actually just consuming this as a service, and Beyond Trust are going to be managing that platform for them and managing all the backend infrastructure. So again, it really releases the customer from any real burden, minimizes the kind of effort and deployment processing that is required to actually get the system stood up. Again, we're going to use an EPM agent, and this time we're going to use a PM SaaS adapter at the client side. That's going to create much the same secure HTTPS connection between the client side and the appliance itself, or the PM SaaS platform, and allow us to consume that data back and push audit configuration down to that system. Again, we can see the information is going to be retained into an internal SQL database within the PM SaaS platform. And again, we're going to use an MMC snapping at the client side, a web-based interface for doing some of the administration tasks. And that MMC snapping can, again, talk to our internal database to retrieve that audit data and make use of it when we're building policy out as well. So that's a quick summary of the different management platform architectures and how they actually interoperate. Now, of course, each one of these has more nuance within it. It has different considerations when customers have specific requirements around disaster recovery, and obviously things like high availability. Again, many of these, it may be inherent with the platform. In some cases, it is automatically applied in the case of the PM SaaS instance, for example, and in some cases, it can simply be architected into the solution in the case of the BI platform as well. So next we're going to take a little look at a comparison between the different platforms, a quick summary. And again, I'm going to pick out a few items on the list just to highlight where there are some differences and gaps, just to, again, make sure that we can understand where we might select one over the other, or where there may be a disqualifying factor where one may not be the most appropriate option. So taking a look at things like OS support, again, something we talked about right at the start when we introduced the different management platforms was the concept that the Active Directory system is very much Windows only, whereas each of the other management platforms do allow us to support both Windows and Mac devices. And the little asterisk alongside the Beyond Insight platform indicates that that one obviously also allows us to support Unix and Linux systems and our Provision Management Unix Linux client as well from the same type of infrastructure. In terms of targeting configuration, again, we do have some more flexibility when it comes to Active Directory for targeting both users and machine objects, whereas things like McAfee EPO is much more focused around machines, as is the PM SaaS platform, whereas again, Beyond Insight has much more closer alignment to Active Directory. Again, we can target users or machines with policy. Again, depending on what we would like to do, most commonly we're going to target machines. That's certainly the most common way for EPM policy to be built, because we then perform filtering within the configuration based on users. But again, some customers may choose or may require user support. And again, this may guide our choices in terms of what we need to deploy. Deployment models, let's take a look at those. Again, we can see that for Active Directory and EPO, those are both traditionally on-prem infrastructures, although again, we have talked about how we can expose those to the internet to support our field-based or remote users. For Beyond Insight, we do have some flexibility. We can deploy that either on-prem or into the cloud. And again, finally, we have PM SaaS, which is obviously a cloud instance, but it is a hosted instance. So again, you wouldn't be deploying that into a customer's own environment. That's going to be hosted on their behalf by Beyond Trust. A little bit different. So again, some customers may have limitations on consuming cloud services. Again, that may be an area where we might need to look at one of the other platforms to actually support them in that case. Looking at the deployment models, again, for both Active Directory and McAfee EPO, they're both going to be software installs. For Beyond Insight, the traditional model is an appliance model. Again, it's a pre-built, pre-packaged appliance that customers can consume. One of the benefits of that approach is they don't have to be responsible for any of the management of the underlying system. Whereas with software installs, of course, you're going to have to be feeding and watering the underlying system, like a Windows operating system, for example. Whereas with the appliance model, all the updates are included. It's automated as part of the solution. So again, it's a very much like a SaaS-like experience almost for that type of appliance. But again, it is going to be deployed into a customer's network. They are going to be actually interacting with it and managing the system themselves. For PM SaaS, of course, there is no deployment. It's just provisioned on the user's behalf that's ready for them to consume right from the start. In terms of additional infrastructure requirements, again, we look at Active Directory. We talked about that idea of event collectors or event servers that are working to collate the audit data back from our end user systems. And of course, we need that SQL Server backend as well to allow us to store that information. In EPO's case, we need that SQL Server backend as well. And again, we're leveraging the rest of their ecosystem to do that event collection. For Beyond Insight, we don't need anything outside of a traditional appliance. We do have appliances that include the SQL Server instances as well. So again, in that case, we wouldn't need to do anything. There are some different models that, again, could apply depending on what the customer requirements, if they want to bring certain components into the infrastructure themselves. But traditionally, nothing else is going to be required. And of course, for PM SaaS, again, there's no requirement for anything on the customer side. Scalability, again, for Active Directory, as you mentioned, very highly scalable, but it scales with the environment. So no need to explicitly scale anything out apart from maybe the Windows Event Collector infrastructure. But again, the capacities on those are actually very, very high. So again, typically doesn't need an awful lot of scaling. EPO, again, that can be scaled out by adding additional servers. But again, we're piggybacking on the existing infrastructure, not something we need to scale out ourselves. Beyond Insight, we can scale out with additional servers to, again, allow, for example, the event server infrastructure to be scaled out to support more machines. So again, very simple to support. And in the case of PM SaaS, again, it's something that's dynamically scaling. So it's designed to be scaled out very quickly and easily. No sort of specific requirement for the customer to actually do any of that. So really the only standout one there is going to be the Beyond Insight one, where the customer might actually need to deploy more appliances if they need to go beyond the capacity of the current systems, for example. Now, role-based access control, something that always comes up. Again, we do have native role-based access control in things like group policy, obviously the way we can delegate permissions and access. We can also integrate into something like an advanced group policy management editor as well to give further control. And then each of the other management platforms all have their own native capabilities. Again, we can leverage the native EPO capability to delegate rights. Beyond Insight has, again, a very robust, very detailed role-based access control model. And PMSAS also has its own structured role-based access controls within the system as well to delegate access to different operations and functions. In terms of platform management, again, we've kind of alluded to some of this as we've been going along. In the case of Active Directory and Group and EPO, for example, those are predominantly the customers to manage, whereas Beyond Insight is going to be a joint customer and Beyond Trust responsibility. As you mentioned, some of those automated updates, we're going to be actually packaging those, delivering them out through the auto update mechanism as part of the appliance. But the customers will be responsible for things like network connectivity and actually interacting with the system, fine-tuning the configuration to suit their needs. And then, of course, PM SaaS, very much the infrastructure is going to be supported by Beyond Trust. So the customer is just consuming the end result of that. And then finally, integrations. Of course, Active Directory, very much a limited ecosystem. So again, the client-side integrations are really the only route available to us there. EPO, we do have client-side extensions again, but also things like the DXL and TIE platforms or platform capabilities that McAfee offer. Beyond Insight has obviously the ability to use the same client-side integration options, but also has server-side integrations with a variety of different systems. Again, they can be things like SIEM platforms that might consume the audit data we're collecting into the system as well, and a variety of other options. So again, it's certainly something we can explore through our documentation. And then PM SaaS, again, currently client-side only integrations, much like we've seen with some of the other platforms. So again, if that's a requirement for customers, that can also guide their decision-making. So that's a quick overview of the different management platforms and picking out some of the key topics and differences that separate them and where customers' requirements may also then enforce restrictions on which one we can actually pick from this list. So let's take a quick look at a summary of what we've learned so far in that module. So we've learned obviously that EPM can be managed very, very flexibly, whether the users are working remotely and offline. Again, we can support them across the internet or when they're in a LAN in an office environment, for example. If the customer wants to host a solution or if they want to have it hosted for them, we have options there as well. And again, whatever size the customer is, whatever size their estate is, we have deployments that range from a few hundreds up to 450,000 endpoints using those different management platforms and technologies. So we have a lot of experience at deploying this technology at scale and architecting solutions that can support those different requirements and different needs. As you mentioned, the customers can mix and match different management tools and different platforms depending on the different systems they're trying to manage. Again, if they have isolated and air-gapped systems, as well as kind of a more traditional user estate, again, we must think about this. We're not just talking about end user systems, we may also be talking about server infrastructure as well. Again, that may require a mixture of different tools and technologies to actually allow us to support those different systems effectively. But ultimately, all the platforms do share a common configuration file. And again, that does mean that customers are not tied into one infrastructure at any one time. Again, complete portability. And of course, where we are using this blend of different management platforms, again, it's just one less headache and hassle because we can just use the same policy delivered from different management platforms as well. So that concludes this deployment methodology section, looking at the management platforms for EPM. I hope you found these sessions useful. And even if you were familiar with the EPM technology, being able to take away some new learnings that you can then apply in the future.